Welcome to Illuminati Silver. We tell you the truth about silver. Today is Tuesday, the 31st of December, 2019. And at the time of producing this podcast, it is almost 4 p.m. GMT, or 1600 hours GMT. Now, I was planning on actually talking about equity markets today, but to be perfectly frank, I've run a little bit out of time, and the equity podcast will be quite substantial. Also, we're quite excited because the gold and silver markets are very shortly going to close, and we predicted that gold would be $1,500 up to, but not exceeding $1,525 at the end of the year, and silver would end the year at $18 maximum, but could fall slightly below between $1,750 and $18, but I tended to think it'd be closer to 18 than 1750. Well, at this precise moment in time, gold is $15.22 and silver is $17.91. It'll be very interesting to see where they will end up in a few minutes' time, or a few hours' time. Anyway, so because we're rather short on time, we thought we'd do a very, very brief podcast with controversially Greg, addressing geopolitical issues that are likely to affect equity markets, currency markets, and the gold and silver markets in 2020. So without further ado, Greg, are you online?
I am indeed, and good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
For the last time this year. In fact, for the last time this decade.
Geopolitical Events 2020. Greg, over to you. What are they going to be? What are they going to look like? And how are they going to affect us all?
I think North Korea will continue with its saber rattling. I don't think it's stupid enough to actually follow through on anything, but it will be a monumental pain in the butt for most of the year, which seems to be its role in life. Both Russia and China will be playing it like a fish as something of a weapon against America, but I don't think it's going anywhere. I think we're going to find that we'll be in a not dissimilar position at the end of this year as far as North Korea is concerned. This will give difficulties to America on an ongoing basis, but it will also give difficulties to South Korea because there are great hopes in South Korea that there will be a freeing up of the system so that families can at least communicate in a civilized manner across the border, which has been separated since the 1950s, and families have been fractured as a result with the hideous regime that has been in North Korea with its gulags, or whatever they call them this week, and almost mass starvation of near cloned people because none of them dare speak out of turn. In fact, none of them dare have different haircuts to that which has been prescribed by their leader. Moving on from there, Japan is, I think, going to continue economically reeling, bumping along with very low interest rates, or as they wonderfully called it a little while back, negative growth, which is tautology run riot. China and America will continue to arm wrestle, but I don't think it's going to get more serious than that. I think India will be upping its game during the course of the year, but I think there's going to be a fairly major shift globally as more and more people realize that the climate myth just doesn't wash. When you think that, yes, Australia is burning at the moment, but Australia is a fire continent. Many of the plants in Australia do not germinate without fire. It's a continent that has experienced fire every dry season for millennia. Over recent years, not because of the sun's cycle, which is what drives weather patterns worldwide, but in fact, a huge amount of damage has been done in Australia by so-called greenies who have opposed stripping out of dead wood fuel that lies around in the forest areas, particularly on the outskirts of towns. And they have permitted the mulch to develop too deeply. Net result, the fires have been very, very vicious this year. And also, do bear in mind, in 1896, 407 people died 24 days in January from heat because the temperature was over 40 and was peaking at 49 degrees. That was 1896, and 437 people died in 24 days from the temperature of presumably that ice age, or whatever the authorities at the United Nations wish to call it.
Yeah, Greg, if I stop you there, I need to talk about geopolitical issues, not just climate change. So,
that's the greatest geopolitical issue going.
Well, Kim Jong-un, you don't see as being a problem to the West or to America?
I don't see him as becoming a major problem.
Right. What about Syria and Turkey then? What's going on there? And how do you see that emanating? Because obviously now Russia has almost free range in Syria, doesn't it?
I think what we have to realize is that much of what goes on in America when it comes to global strategies when dealing with the Russians is complete eyewash for the public back home. We only have to look back on the Kennedy era when Kennedy very, very nearly plunged the world into nuclear war. That was the saber rattling and fear of the day over Cuba. However, it was made to look as if Kennedy had pulled off an incredible feat of, I don't know, braggadocio or bravery or whatever on behalf of his country, when, of course, he forced the Russians to remove their missile installation from Cuba. What never got the publicity was the fact that the Russians had said they'd only do it on one condition, and that was that America moved its missile installations from Turkey, and America removed its installation, and subsequently so did Russia from Cuba. So it wasn't as wonderful an outcome as the West would like to paint it. Going on from there, we see much the same sort of saber rattling going on now. I think there is little doubt that Russia played a part in the election of Trump, in the realization that Trump would be easier to deal with than Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton was by no means a good candidate for the Democrats or for America. Trump, who, in fact, for the very same reason that the Democrats really haven't got a credible candidate, or there doesn't seem to be one at the moment, and they have got involved in this geriatric spite war over impeachment and taking any measure they can to impede Donald Trump. Understandable from their point of view, but not very clever politics, because it can be very easily painted as vindictive. So I think we're going to find that the Democrats are so bereft of a decent candidate that Trump will get returned in November, and I believe that he will actually have a majority this time, as opposed to merely winning the election. I think he will do marginally better because there are, without a doubt, areas that can be talked up in his actions. The fact that he has colluded with foreign governments somehow will slide out of the window. He has sold out to foreign governments. There's no doubt about it, in my mind. He's made a complete Horlicks of Syria. 1 minute he's coming, the next minute he's going. It's a bit like a cha-cha, you know. One step in and one step out. Syria has been a mess and is not a lot closer to a resolution. As a result, Turkey has become a very strange partner. It's still calling itself a member of NATO, but cozying up to a great extent with Russia and becoming progressively more an Islamic state. The European Union, I think, is going to experience a great deal of difficulty in the next year or two. That is not to say that Britain won't have its difficulties in taking the decision to leave the European Union. However, I don't think they're going to prove anything but beneficial for Britain in the medium to long term. We're in a very, very good position at the moment, with Labour having almost committed suicide in the last election, and it would look very much at the moment as if Labour is about to commit itself to not just internecine war, but a vandalistic act of seppuku with an appalling choice of leaders, merely following on the mistake of having backed Corbyn. There doesn't seem to be a single possible individual in the Labour Party who is a credible leader who would stand any chance of bringing the party back together. And even if they did materialise, I have a feeling they would have their throats cut by Momentum, who have seized power of almost all of the levers of power in the Labour Party and were behind the catastrophic result they had in the general election, where they were backed right the way to 1935 to find a time when Labour had done so badly. I think France will have problems. It's failed for a year to cope with its gilets jaunes, the yellow jackets. The people are in a state of near revolution in many areas of France. The governance is to a great extent hated, and it has failed on many counts. The German government also has difficulties. And when you think that, take a little tiny country like Sweden, and I say tiny based on its population of Swedes in Sweden, that they had thrown the floodgates open to immigration, and now find that only about 1 in 10 of the immigrants who flooded in, and I believe now outnumber indigenous Swedes, only about 1 in 10 of them are willing to work, because benefits in Sweden were better than the incomes they used to earn in their own countries. And one measure of the unrest in Sweden is that in the first 11 months of 2019, there were over 200 bombs let off in and around Sweden, in desperation, in a society that has become multicultural to the point of being utterly divided, with deep-seated hatreds and staggeringly high rape rates. Sweden is in a terrible mess, though it's desperately hanging on to the shirt tails of Greta Thunberg to distract everybody from the realities of their country with the myths she is peddling as a puppet in nothing more than distraction.
Well, interestingly, I saw an interview. Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz was interviewed by the Jewish lobby a few days ago. And he made a very interesting comment about Trump and Russia and collusion. And I'm paraphrasing, these weren't exactly his words, but this is broadly what he said. Yes, the Russians got involved in the election. Yes, they wanted Trump to win. There's no evidence to show that Trump colluded with them, but he just took advantage of that opportunity, basically. That was more or less his take on it. Going back to the UK, we produced a video yesterday about top investments for 2019. And interestingly, as far as equities were concerned, the two major poorest performers last year were essentially the Hang Seng index, but that was still up 11%. And we can understand what's been going on there because of the civil riots and so on. And the next worst was the FTSE 100 index, 13%. And as we pointed out in previous videos, market makers now and traders are starting to say, hold on, the UK equity market is now becoming, or has become, one of the more attractive markets for next year for investors to invest in. Now, this is, of course, on the basis that you believe that equities are not due a major correction in the United States and elsewhere. So they're talking up the UK economy as far as equity investment is concerned. And obviously that would be music to Boris Johnson's ears. So in a nutshell, Greg, because we said this would be a short podcast, what area would you say will have the greatest impact on the dollar, on equities, and hopefully, one way or the other, gold and silver?
I would have thought that in their trading, setting up a trade deal with Britain, which I think is more than likely to the point of being virtually a certainty, because we have been allies for a very long time. And like any family, the squabbling can appear much worse than it actually is. And America tolerates our vagaries, and for lack of a better description, we put up with theirs. So I don't think there's going to be problems on that front. I do think that Britain will increasingly be seen as the go-to place for investment. I think that the euro is going to have quite considerable problems because so many countries in Europe are utterly dependent on being propped up by Germany. And Germany was being propped up by Britain, but we're not propping them up anymore. We're not making our contribution anymore. Well, I say that we are still, but the horizon is fast approaching. That will leave Germany as the effectively only viable economy that can support the whole of the rest of Europe.
And they're on the brink, on the brink of recession themselves, Greg.
Yeah, and I believe it will fail. Mm-hmm. Much of that, the brink of recession at the moment, is the fear that they're going to wind up with the bill for everything if they're not damn careful. I think this is a recession of confidence more than reality at the moment, but I think it is very close to switching over to being reality. Gold and silver, I think that they will just steadily keep ahead marginally of inflation reactions, but I think there will be a lot of inflation reactions taking place. We've already watched the inflationary move in Britain, although it hasn't come through as inflation yet, of the promise of an increase in the minimum wage. Well, that's got to be paid from somewhere, and I cannot see it being viable for an awful lot of people when you think that somewhere in the region of 140,000 retail businesses have closed in the last couple of years due to a fall away in public spending. I think that you're going to find that it becomes increasingly difficult to sustain the increase in minimum wage, the automatic increase that will cause potentially to benefits, and our indubitably undeniable inability to fund our ever-growing old people bill. So we have economic problems, but I think our safest and best way of solving them will be with allies to be out of the European Union, able to move much faster and more independently on our feet. Bear in mind that 85% of all of the goods that go into the European Union from countries with whom Europe does not have a bespoke trading agreement. They come in from countries which are fundamentally on World Trade Organization agreement. And I would not be surprised to see Europe trying to play hardball and overplaying it, and finding that Britain walks away on the basis of, we'll struggle, we'll cope, but we are not going to lick your boots. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Well, Greg, we have to round up here. I will be producing our forecast on equities and the dollar. It's more likely to be Friday rather than tomorrow being New Year's Day. And then, of course, we'll have our weekly roundup on Saturday. And then early in January, probably the beginning of the second week, we'll produce our gold and silver forecast, by which time we'll have spoken with some traders. I'd have had a chance to look at the charts and to undertake the analysis that I do. Having said all of that, Greg, basically what you're saying to us, and correct me if I'm wrong, broadly, the overall political or geopolitical outlook is not that serious in your view for 2020, but we have to be cognizant of the fact that there will be an election in America at the end of the year, but you're predicting a Trump victory, and that really Europe is perhaps the baby to watch.
I think that's roughly my thinking on this. I think that there's one thing which I appreciate you tend to downplay. The most expensive bill ever passed through the British Parliament pertains to climate change is sufficient to utterly bankrupt Britain. Therefore, that is going to play a very big part in our forward movement.
Well, on that note, Greg, that very optimistic note, have a happy new year. Do not over-celebrate this evening, because no doubt we will be searching for words of wisdom, if not tomorrow, then on Friday.
Tonight is the worst day of the year to go out. Every idiot and his uncle will be showing off to each other and making fools of themselves. Indeed. Thank you. No, thank you. I
And a
have
happy
brain cells without killing them.
And a happy new year to all of our listeners. Thank you,
Have
Greg.
a great 2020, and may this decade prove to be a phenomenal vintage by the end of it.
Indeed. Thank you so much. We hope you have found this video interesting and informative. And if so, please give it a thumbs up and share it on social media. Please ensure that you have subscribed to our channel and press the bell sign so that you are notified of any future videos. Also, kindly visit our website at illuminatisilver.com, and if you haven't already done so, please subscribe either as a free or paying member for regular email updates and offers. Disclaimer: Illuminati Silver owners come from a background of banking, international wealth management and economics. Having now retired from these worlds, we are not qualified to give investment advice. Therefore, this and other productions must not be deemed to be giving such advice and merely represent the personal views of its owners.